Welcome to day 2 of our R&D Tax Summit, our 3-day digital event designed for accountants and advisors navigating the changing R&D tax landscape. For our second session of the day, we are absolutely thrilled to welcome our special guest, Richard Edwards from the R&D Community. Richard's going to be presenting an interactive talk today titled Building Competence in R&D Tax, designed to equip accountants with essential skills and knowledge in R&D Tax. Joining Richard is Mike Dean, our co-founder and managing director here at WhisperClaims. Just before we get going, just a tiny bit of housekeeping. The chat box is going to be used by Richard during the session for the interactive portion of his talk. So if anybody does have any questions for the Q&A later on, please can you pop those questions in the Q&A box that will be somewhere around the middle of your Zoom ribbon at the bottom of your screen or wherever you have that. Of course, if you do want to chat to us or the audience, pop your chat in the chat box and we will get to that and the questions later on. Over to you, Richard and Mike.
Brilliant, thank you, Suze. Just before we get into the main meat and bones of the session, I just wanted to quickly talk about the overall tax summit. Many of you are on the call just now will probably have been to earlier sessions that we've run this week anyway. But for those of you who haven't, the R&D Tax Summit is running over 3 days this week. We're now halfway through already, so 3 sessions to go. The motivation for doing this has simply been that the market's been subject to a huge amount of change over the last 18 months to 2 years, with all of the changes to legislation, and not least because of the changes to HMRC's behaviour around the scheme as well. And there's inevitably been a lot of chatter around that on social media and elsewhere, and a lot of people focused on the detail of those changes. And of course, we ran a session yesterday morning that was about just that and kind of setting the scene to the whole discussion. But what we intended the whole summit to be was to give a much more holistic view of the state of the market, people's experiences within the market, and what people are doing to kind of mitigate for those changes. And of course, we hope as we move forward, there's going to be a lot more stability in the market. And I guess that also means we're going to have to accept some of the changes that have been put in front of us today. So we've all got to find a way, if you like, to work happily in this market going forward. So that's been the goal, to kind of close that gap between just talking about the legislation, but actually talk about how do we mitigate for all of that and make the whole R&D tax world a happier place as we move forward. So there's just 2 sessions left after today's, both tomorrow. So tomorrow morning we've got Joe Edwards from JE Consulting joining us to work through a marketing session, so making your mark, which is all about launching and promoting an R&D tax service. So hopefully that'll appeal to a bunch of you. And in the afternoon tomorrow, Suze and I will be going through what is effectively a demo of WhisperClaims capability. So we'll be able to show you in some detail how our software works and how we support our customers out there in the market. Suze will post up the link to those 2 events tomorrow. So as I say, if they're of interest, please do come and join us tomorrow. It'd be fantastic to see you there. So I'll stop sharing my slides and hand over to Richard. So Richard, before you jump into the presentation, do you want to just give us a quick intro to yourself and more particularly to the R&D community?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thank you very much for inviting me along to speak today, and thanks to everyone for turning up to listen to what we've got to say. The R&D community is very much a mission-led company in terms of we want to see higher standards in the industry. And it's interesting to see some of the things that HMRC is doing just now to try and raise standards, arguably in quite a kind of heavy-handed fashion. But yeah, our kind of whole ethos is about how we help support, train advisors, people working in R&D tax relief, so that they can deliver a really good service to your clients. And I'll be talking a little bit about how a learning platform like ours can work quite synergistically with R&D tech like WhisperClaims as well. So yeah, I will share my slides and we can get underway. Can I just check that's showing okay?
Yeah,
fantastic.
we can see that.
So first thing to mention is you'll be excited to know that this is in fact an interactive webinar. So it's not just me talking at you. We will have a portion, the final third or half of this webinar will be a chance to look at some training. I'll be taking you through a few slides on a particular practical point relating to the scheme, and then there'll be a chance to answer some questions. So we'll be working through this as a group, so don't feel kind of that you're going to be singled out. That's not the case. In terms of the things that I am going to be covering, I'm going to be talking about some of the reasons why I think training in R&D tax relief has become so important right now, because of what HMRC is doing and a few other interesting things going on in the market. Then we'll be talking about the right knowledge and skills, specifically for R&D, what those are, and how you can actually embed those into your firm or your company. And then lastly, as I said, we'll be focusing on a mini training session. So I want that to be really practical, something that you can take away and use. And we'll be working through the online assessment that's actually kind of part of our platform as well. And then I'll be kind of briefly talking about if you're wanting to learn more about R&D and the schemes and get more help and support and training, I'll give you some pointers on where you can go for that. If you do have questions as we go through this, I'm not going to be looking at the Q&A box myself, but Suze, please feel free. If you think it's pertinent, just stop me and we'll deal with those questions. And if it's a big one, we'll circle back and deal with it at the end. So the first thing that I want to talk about is why R&D training is so important right now. And I think a lot of this relates to HMRC's behavior. So if you think back to the very start of the scheme and when it first came out more than 20 years ago, HMRC was kind of very keen to get traction, more companies applying. And what happened over the decades was that there was an ever-increasing volume of claims being submitted. And you could argue that there was kind of eligibility creep in terms of what was considered to be R&D. Partly that was driven by some players in the market. Other times it's companies just not having a good idea about what the definition of R&D is. And we ended up in a situation where actually lots of claims were going in that really didn't meet the qualifying criteria. And this started to hit the national press going back maybe 18 months ago. Stories started appearing. And then some of the politicians started asking questions and putting HMRC under quite a lot of pressure to justify this form of relief. So what this translated into was a fairly serious crackdown from HMRC that probably started towards the end of 2022. And it really is still in full swing just now. So the way that HMRC is organized when it comes to the inquiry side of things is they've got two main business units, if you like. There's the ISBC, the Individual and Small Business Compliance Unit, and then you've got the WMBC, the Wealthy and Mid-sized Business Compliance Unit. They both have quite different approaches to inquiries. And from what we can gather from what's been reported by our members and more generally, is that the ISBC, that's a volume compliance approach where they're using templates, they're using AI, and generally it's a case of computer says no. Like if a claim goes into ISBC, it can be very, very hard to kind of fight it through right the other side. Whereas if you're dealing with the WMBC, you're typically dealing with a named inspector, and it can be a bit easier and you're speaking to a more reasonable, experienced person perhaps than if you're going through the other route. So anyway, the point here is that HMRC, after close to 20 years, I want to say asleep at the wheel is probably a bit kind of harsh, but the fact is they've not been paying enough attention to who's been claiming for what, and now that they definitely are. So that kind of crackdown is ongoing. Coupled with that, the second thing is they've just done a consultation on raising standards in R&D, raising standards in the tax advisory market. So not just R&D, but looking more broadly at different forms of tax, what's going on, who's making claims, who's helping people, are they affiliated with the professional bodies, are they unaffiliated, where are the problems coming from? All of this is kind of on the table and in the spotlight for HMRC at the moment. Now, that consultation closed on the 29th of May. We submitted a pretty comprehensive response to that consultation. But it definitely seems that whatever direction HMRC chooses to go in, like whether they co-opt the professional bodies to do more of the regulatory piece, or whether indeed they spool up a new body, which is specifically looking at regulating tax advisors of all stripes, it does seem really likely that training and perhaps even certification is going to be an important part of this kind of quality jigsaw that they're kind of pulling together. So on one hand, it's really good that HMRC is now not just thinking about this, but it's actually kind of starting that slow process towards making some decisions, and then from decisions come action. the slightly disappointing thing is that they're talking about improving things over 3 to 5 years. And arguably there's a case for, we need action right now. So certainly our response was kind of based on, look, there are things that we could do right now if HMRC is prepared to work with some of the key players in the industry, so we could kind of collectively improve things much more quickly.
Richard, just on that point, as you say, that structural shift, if you like, from a regulatory point of view, is likely to take years. But in the session that we ran this morning, we had 3 of our customers on there who are all, as you described them, as small to mid-sized accountancy firms, general practice, where R&D is an important component of what they deliver. And all of them were talking about the fact that they, now more so than ever, although all of them also said they've always, to one degree or another, been down this path, they're using compliance, strict compliance, as a way of differentiating themselves and being seen to add real value to their clients.
Yeah.
And that feels like it's in the context of this issue of raising standards, but it's, it's in the here and now, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you kind of look back, maybe not even that far, maybe 2, 3, 5 years, a lot of advisors were differentiating themselves on price or the claim size. It's like, well, we'll get you more back, we'll charge the least amount of money, giving you the most amount of money. And I'd say there's been a real shift away from that messaging, much more towards, quality and compliance and kind of avoiding HMRC. It's all about kind of safety and security and being conservative and in line with the ethos of the scheme, so that you're not having your claims as an advisor pulled out of the heap. Because the last thing you want to do is kind of end up under the eye of Sauron and HMRC think that you're an advisor of concern.
Yeah.
So I'd say there's been a shift from maybe the commercial aspects of this to claim quality and therefore the longevity of your service.
Yeah.
The other interesting and perhaps ironic thing is that HMRC recently, as I'm sure a lot of people will be aware, brought out 2 new R&D schemes. The merge scheme and the ERA scheme, which is for the high R&D intensive SMEs. So one of their overall goals was about simplification of the schemes. And unfortunately, it's not exactly backfired, but there's a lot of complexity to deal with in this kind of transitional window. So if we actually lay out the different schemes that we now have to know about, we've got RDIC, we've got SME scheme, we've got the R&D intensive scheme, which is heavily based on the SME scheme. We've got the ERIS and merge scheme, which are very, very kind of similar in terms of how they operate. But even without kind of getting down into the nitty gritty of how all these schemes work, because I think you covered that in the previous session, the point I'm making here is that there's 5 different schemes and each of them is different, but they have similarities to each other and they have some differences as well. So as an advisor, like keeping all this detail kind of straight in your head can be, it can be difficult because there's just so much of it. And actually, if we look forward to the future as well, in terms of how long this transitional window is going to last, it's going to last for a little bit of time. So we've got the merge scheme and the ERA schemes. Those are for accounting periods starting on or after 1st of April 2024. And those will just roll on into the future. And then obviously we've got the legacy schemes. We've got the SME scheme and the RDET scheme, which is for any accounting period starting before 1st of April 2024. The slight issue being is because of that kind of transition date, if we consider the case of a claim period, an accounting period starting on 1st of March 24, that ends on the 28th of February, which means it could be submitted 28th February 26, and it could be amended a year after that. So that means that advisors are going to have to know about RDIC and SME up until, say, the end of February 2027. So when I talk about transitional window, it's quite a long window. And just to add to this, we've also got the R&D intensive scheme for SMEs. And the slight quirk with that isn't for accounting periods starting from a particular date. That's just for expenditure from a particular date. So again, there's another kind of small inconsistency between how the different schemes work. So the whole point I'm trying to make here is there's a lot to think about. And HMRC not necessarily
there's a word missing from the title on your slide there, Richard, because this was intended by HMRC to be the simplified R&D tax scheme. So, and it's anything but.
Yeah. I think we're kind of going through a spike in complexity.
Yeah.
At the moment. So if you're watching this thinking, well, you know, how do you kind of respond to this? I would say that most of the kind of accountants and people that we're speaking to, they're cognizant of this complexity, but they're not necessarily fazed by it. They want to do this really well. They want to provide a great service to their clients. And one big thing, obviously, is kind of doing this right and staying ahead of HMRC and avoiding the inquiries that are avoidable. Not all inquiries are, because some of them are genuinely random. But there's also a lot that you can do to make sure that your claims are better than the majority of claims that HMRC is looking at. So it's really kind of helping to minimize your risk and your exposure and your client's liability as well. And quite commonly, people just want another kind of a way to augment or confirm your own understanding of the schemes and the rules. Just to kind of, it's always helpful sometimes to get that kind of second opinion. And then some people will already be using R&D Tech, particularly like WhisperClaims, but they want to get the best possible use out of it. And I think from our perspective, our position and feeling is that when you really understand the scheme, that can work very synergistically with a software platform like WhisperClaims, because then you really understand kind of what you're trying to achieve with a very convenient, easy to use piece of software. So if we move on to the second part, which is considering what is the knowledge, what are the bits of knowledge and skills that are really useful to embed within your firms, what I've done is I've grouped these into three areas. The front end process, which is really everything that runs up to the point of getting the contract signed with your customer. There's claim preparation phase, which runs from contract signing all the way through to the submission of the CT600. And then section 3 is the technical knowledge that you draw on in order to make phase 2 go really smoothly. So what I've done is for each of these 3 areas, I've given you some more detailed points to consider. So the first of these is marketing your service. Why do you need to know about that? Well, there's some interesting anecdotal evidence to suggest that HMRC is increasingly looking at how advisors are marketing their services. So they're looking at the website and they're factoring that into the risk assessment process of, do we feel comfortable with this advisor or do we not? Is this perhaps an advisor of concern? And that is going to have an impact sometimes on whether they choose to open an inquiry into one of your claims or whether they open it into somebody else's. So knowing how to market your service safely, I think, is becoming increasingly important. Another important thing is, I would say, assuming your kind of claim preparation process is good, it's a truism that if you're working with good prospects, that's generally going to turn into good quality claims. And conversely, if you're kind of dealing with bad quality prospects, you're not going to get good results from dealing with that. So the screening of companies in terms of working out of all the people approaching you, or perhaps you're approaching companies, being able to differentiate between those that represent a really good opportunity, that's a really useful skill to now have, because you want to be spending your time dealing with the strong cases and really filtering out and declining to work with the ones which are much more grey or borderline, because those are the ones that HMRC is increasingly clamping down on. And inquiries are expensive and time consuming. So not taking risks and focusing on the kind of stronger claims is definitely an important and teachable skill. Obviously, setting commercial terms is a useful thing as well. And some advisors, some of our members are kind of gradually shifting away from a contingent fee model to one that's much more based on maybe fixed fees for different parts of the claim process. And the reason that people are doing that is to kind of factor in the changing risk within this kind of environment that we're all working within. And then I would say it's becoming increasingly vital, this kind of piece about shaping expectations with your client, helping them understand what to expect from you and what you expect of them. Because maybe in the old days, you had clients kind of sitting back and saying, okay, I've signed the contract, you do your magic and I'll sit back here and wait for the check to come through. That doesn't fly anymore. So HMRC has made very, very clear in its guidelines for compliance what they expect from the client, even before they start to work with you as the advisor. So the client needs to kind of really understand that things have changed. They need to be very closely involved in this, because after all, they have the competent professionals, they've got the detail to support you as the advisor. You as the advisor need to know the process and the rules and the schemes. The client needs to have that technical knowledge. But I suppose in some ways that's good for you as the advisor, because it takes the pressure off. You don't need to be an expert in electronics and biotech and software and all these other things. you need to know the rules inside out and help the client understand what those rules are. And that creates a great partnership between you and the client.
We've seen a shift, just as a bit of an aside, we've seen a big shift, I suppose largely since the AIF was introduced, towards people using our collaboration feature in the software a lot more. So actually involving the client in writing the technical narrative themselves and using the tools to kind of encourage them and support them through that process, rather than, as you say, what used to be the opposite of that, which was listening to the client and interpreting that and trying to write something up yourself. So really reflecting the fact that it's the client is the competent professional in whatever field it is that you're working in.
Absolutely. The client's the kind of star, and it's the advisor's job to kind of get the best possible result based on the client's kind of feeling and understanding about the definition of R&D.
Yeah.
So moving on then to the middle piece of this, the claim prep. The first of this is actually knowing when to re-notify HMRC that the company intends to make a claim, because it's such a simple thing, or it should be such a simple thing, but if you get that wrong, then HMRC will turn around and say, well, this might be the best claim in the world, but we're not paying it out because you've not followed the process correctly. So that is actually the piece that we're going to focus on in our mini training exercise shortly, is pre-notification, the rules, and I'll explain why it's so problematic in terms of there's a gap in HMRC's guidance, which is really, I think it's unintentional, but it's deeply unfortunate that their guidance is incomplete. So I'll explain what that issue is. And then, as we were just discussing, I think the role of an advisor is all about guiding the client, helping them understand that generic definition of R&D, what they need to understand in terms of the concepts. So the baseline, the advanced, the uncertainties, what that actually entails. And I kind of think of the advisor's role as being like a constructive skeptic. So you're almost kind of sense checking what the client is saying, almost from HMRC's perspective. You're kind of providing a first level of challenge, because the types of questions that you might be asking are probably the same ones that HMRC would be asking as well. So if the client's giving you some information, but you can't just quite see the wood for the trees, you can't see the advance, you know, asking about that and seeking clarification is a wonderful thing to do, because if you don't, HMRC will. And then, as discussed, it's really the client's job to provide that detail. And then the last stage is the completion of the AIF. So in terms of the technical knowledge that helps that claim prep process go as smoothly as possible, here's what I think you need to know about. First of all, you've got the differences between the 5 schemes that we skimmed over in that earlier slide, but particularly in respect to grants and subsidies, because those have big impacts in some schemes and not at all in other schemes. So understanding that is definitely worthwhile. Also, with the subcontracting rules, there's a big change between the old SME scheme and the new merge scheme in terms of who can claim. HMRC applies some very kind of rigid rules in the old scheme, basically saying that if you're an SME, but you're conducting R&D as part of a contract with somebody else, there's very, very few cases where you're able to claim. Whereas in the new schemes, it's actually a bit more open, and they've taken a more pragmatic view that sometimes it's the subcontractor, sometimes it's the company commissioning the work. It all depends on a series of factors. So you could argue that, well, they've stepped in the right direction, but unfortunately, there's a lot of complexity still there because it depends on all these factors. So that is still a kind of rich and complex area, I would say, the subcontracting piece. Knowing when the overseas expenditure restrictions apply and when they don't is also really important, because that will affect clients that have historically outsourced a lot of development work overseas. They could be caught up in that. And then there's the kind of classic stuff. So what costs can you capture under each of those 5 schemes, and what could constitute reasonable apportionments? Excuse me. And then if you're an accountant actually making the claims, obviously you need to know the relief mechanism. And then I'd also say it's important that because we're seeing so much constant change from HMRC, knowing how to keep updated is also vitally important. And if you do all of that, if you have all of that embedded in your firm, then what you're looking at, I would say, is a pretty solid R&D process that's probably going to produce results which are better than the majority of claims that HMRC is seeing, which hopefully minimizes the risk to you as somebody practicing in this area.
Just before you move off that slide, I didn't stop looking up. What in the R&D community as you stand, what are people sort of talking about the most amongst those different areas? You know, where do you think people are seeing the biggest challenges? Maybe where are they looking for the most support?
I would say it's actually just one of detail. So we run a helpline for our members, and we will get questions which are, you know, relatively simple, but it's like, just can you confirm what's the first date at which we can claim for data licenses, for example, or do I need to kind of pre-notify for this claim? So because advisors have so much detail to think about, you know, we're all human, we all forget stuff. And they see us as a kind of repository of knowledge, which we are. We've got a knowledge bank within our platform as well, because sometimes even we forget and we have to consult our own resources because there's so much information out there. So sometimes the questions we get are very, very kind of nuanced, and we're asked to kind of look at a contract to determine, you know, who's got the best case to claim, the subcontractor or the company commissioning the work. But as I say, mostly it will be, here's the scenario that I've got. Can you help me just kind of understand the rules? So there's not one particular area I'd say. It's just generally there's so much detail, and people just kind of like that kind of second opinion.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so if we move on to considering how you can embed all the kind of skills and knowledge that I've just been talking about, kind of starting from the assumption that most accountants are using kind of cloud-based practice management software. And increasingly, many of those will be using systems like WhisperClaims as well, because it's a really nice, convenient way of capturing information from the client, and it takes a lot of legwork out of the process and provides that really nice, consistent structure. And the third kind of part of this probably won't surprise you, but I think there's a software solution to the learning side of this as well, in terms of if you have a learning portal or a bit of learning software, that can work really synergistically with something like WhisperClaims. So WhisperClaims is providing that kind of infrastructure for capturing data and producing reports. And then the learning portal is all about keeping you up to date and giving you really high quality knowledge, A, that you can pass on to your clients with confidence, make sure that you're giving them the best possible advice, and B, you're then able to make really effective use out of a tool like WhisperClaims. So when it comes to embedding knowledge, I think you need something that's kind of scalable, that's cloud-based, because that fits in with the other tools that you're using. And to be really, really specific when you're kind of selecting a tool or a system, I think it's important that the knowledge that it contains, somebody has made a real effort to make that as clear as possible, because the last thing you want is more questions, more ambiguity. You want to go to something that gives you a definitive answer that's crisp and clear and easy to understand. And it's also concise as well. So you're not having to wade through pages of stuff to find the core content that you need. You're able to find that very quickly. It's also nice that it's centralized or gives you kind of admin type functions, so that if you've got a team of people, perhaps in different geographic locations, then that centralized function means that you can view what's going on across the piece, and you get really good insight into who's engaging with or adopting the training that you've made available to them. So that kind of centralized piece, I think, is important. It should be consistent as well, so that it's giving the same answers, and it's spreading consistent knowledge across your company, which is giving everyone that kind of common basis to work on. Because the last thing you want in your company is Bob over here thinks that something is eligible or that they can claim for this, and Pauline over there thinks completely opposite, because how does that look from a client perspective? So having your team consistent is really important, especially as you kind of want to expand and grow your team. You want it to be on a really kind of solid framework. And then lastly, it should be convenient. So typically you're looking for something that is convenient to you, you can pick up and use when you want to. And I'll talk a little bit at the end about what we do, and I think we can meet these criteria. Okay, can I just pause there, Susan, ask, are there any questions on anything I've covered so far before we move into the little training session?
No questions yet, but if anybody does have any, don't be shy. Pop them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them shortly.
Okay, fantastic. I do notice in the participant list there are some familiar faces and names, so I imagine that you will fly through this, this little piece of training. So what I'm about to take you through is some of the knowledge that's in our course on the Merge Scheme, which is a free course. So we're going to focus on pre-notification. And the reason for this is, first of all, it's really important. As I explained, if you get this wrong, HMRC can potentially knock back the whole claim. And secondly, there's an issue with HMRC's online guidance in that their guidance doesn't refer to part of the legislation, that was introduced in the Finance Bill of 2024. So there are some important concepts that I'm going to make clear. So the first of these is that pre-notification doesn't apply to all claims from a certain date. It's only applying to accounting periods that start on or after the 1st of April 2023. The next thing is that HMRC's got this idea, the concept of a claim notification window. So this defines when the company is able to tell HMRC, hey, look, we're not making the claim right now, but we're just letting you know that we're going to be making a claim for this particular claim period. And HMRC gives companies effectively a time-boxed window in which they can actually do that. That starts from the first day of the claim period, which in this case is 1st of January 2024, and it ends 6 months after the end of that accounting period. And that's the same even if it's an extended accounting period. So the interesting thing about this is that the third concept is that HMRC says, well, you don't need to pre-notify if you've made a claim within 3 years of the end of the claim notification window. So let's go ahead and look at how this works. So here's a claim, here's the claim notification window, and then here's our 3-year period that ends at the end of the claim notification window. And what HMRC is essentially saying that if you submitted a claim prior to that 3-year period, well, that's not in scope. So you would still need to notify for this current period indicated in orange because the previous claim was too far in the past. So yes, here our claim is outside scope, it's not relevant, and the company would need to notify HMRC for this claim in orange. However, if you've submitted a claim within that 3-year period, then generally you don't need to notify for this claim because you're kind of, you've made one relatively recently. But there is one big problem with this, and that's that HMRC is not actually this simple. So here's the problem. Within the legislation concerning pre-notification, there's this additional clause here that says, well, actually, if I take each of these in turn, it says the company may not claim unless it does certain things. So if I take B first, it makes a claim notification in respect of the period, fine. Or it's made a claim within the last 3 years, as we just discussed. And this third point, part C, is really to do with extended accounting periods. It's basically saying that if you've got an extending period and you've already made a claim or a notification for one part of that extended period, then you don't need to notify for the second part. But the section I want to call your attention to is this third part, which is saying certain types of claims made within that 3-year window don't qualify. It's saying ignore any R&D claim for an accounting period that begins before 1st of April 23 that's been made by an amendment on or after the 1st of April 2023. And the real issue is that HMRC's guidance, if you look it up, makes no reference or mention to this very important piece of the legislation. So just to explain how this works in graphical form, it's saying if the previous claim started before 1st of April 23 was made by amendment and that amendment was made after that date, then unfortunately, you've got to discount it. You can't count it within that 3-year period. So even if that claim was submitted, you're not allowed to count it, and you would then need to notify this claim. So that is, HMRC is not making this easy to understand. And in fact, I think the simplest thing is to follow this kind of flow chart, which explains the logic a bit more clearly. And this is something like I'm quite happy, if you want to contact me after this, I'm happy to pass this on. But essentially, there's this kind of little flow chart where if you end up in this kind of green box, the claim counts and you wouldn't need to notify. But if you end up in this orange box down here, then you do need to discount the claim. So that is kind of what I want to cover in terms of the training side, how this works. What we're now going to do is move on to the online assessment, where it's only 4 questions. We'll be walking through this together. So I need to switch platforms, so just give me a second and I will share a different window. So this is the part of our course we're going to be focusing on, rules for pre-notification quick quiz. And what I would like you to do in the chat is, let's take this first one. The claim notification window runs, and then we've got three options here. And what I'd like you to do in the chat box is just type in the first few words, or actually, let's go A, B, C. Give me an A for this one, B for the middle option, and C for the last one. I'll just give you a minute or so to do that.
And you're after people just bunging that in the chat box.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I see we've got some Bs coming in, which is the correct answer. The claim notification window is from the start of the accounting period until 6 months after the end of the accounting period. Thank you very much. And what the system will do is actually tell us if we get any of these wrong once we answer these final two. Cool, thank you. Pre-notification only applies, and then we've got two options. Let's call that B and C. So we've got more Bs coming in. Thank you very much. So yes, that is correct. Pre-notification only applies for accounting periods starting on or after 1st of April 23. And then that leaves us one answer here. A company generally does not need to notify if it's submitted a claim within the 3 years prior to the end of the claim notification window, notwithstanding all the complex points we just discussed. So, fingers crossed.
The great thing about your quizzes here, Rich, is they get easier as you go along.
Yes, well, this particular one, but the questions that were question 4 is much harder. So,
excellent.
Okay. So, second question, a company has made an R&D claim within the 3-year period that ends with the claim notification window. It needs to pre-notify HMRC about its intention to claim R&D tax relief for its current period if one of the 4 following options. So this is where that flow chart would come in really handy. So if you could give me A, B, C, or D, what you feel is the answer. So there's a little bit more thought in this one. So we've got some C's coming in, which I'm pleased to say is the correct answer. So our flowchart said that we don't need to pre-notify for the current claim if the previous claim meets certain conditions, but we do need to pre-notify if it doesn't. So if it was made by amendment and that amendment was made after the 1st of April 2023, then we would need to notify HMRC about the current claim. So there's quite strong consensus that everyone's saying C. Hooray, that's correct. Okay, Company A has an accounting period that runs 1st of July to 30th of June. For the year starting 1st of July 2023, Company A does not have to submit a claim notification to HMRC, B may have to submit a claim notification to HMRC, and C must submit a claim notification. Now, for this one, I'd like you to not only give me A, B, or C, but also give me a quick explanation of why you think that's the case. Okay, so we've got a variety of answers coming in. So let's take each of these answers. So it's starting, for the year starting 1st of July 2023. So first of all, that is after 1st of April 2023. But it might not have to submit if it's made a previous claim. So this answer can't be correct. It cannot be correct that it must claim, because if it's made a previous claim, then it doesn't need to notify. And it's definitely does not have to, because the claim starts after the 1st of April 2023. So actually, it's B, it might have to submit a claim notification depending on whether or not it's made a claim within the last 3 years. And that is what at least some people are saying in the web in the chat. So I think the consensus there is correct. Thank you very much. And then moving on to the last question, you've got XYZ Engineering. They've got a claim period that runs to the calendar year. In summer 2024, it amends its 2022 tax return to include a claim. Which of the following statements applies to the company's claim for 2022?
That one's definitely requiring some thought.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I can see at least some people are hitting on the right answer here. So the first thing that we need to consider is the claim is for 2022. The dates of that 2022 claim period are the 1st of January to 31st December 2022. That the start of that claim period was before the 1st of April 2023. Therefore, we don't need to pre-notify for that claim. And there we go. We have got 100% in that short assessment. So thank you very much for providing your answers and feedback. That was kind of fun for me. I enjoyed that.
And it worked as well. That was really good. Just out of interest, and I don't want to take us off on a tangent because we're only using this as an example, but in that scenario where pre-notification isn't required, presumably also there's no harm in pre-notifying. So it's not the same as the opposite way around. If you don't notify when you should, that's a big problem. But if you did, it wouldn't actually create a problem, would it?
Yeah, and I think there's probably an argument if there's any element of doubt, pre-notify, because it doesn't take very long to do. And as you say, the consequences of doing it, there aren't any, but the consequences of not doing it are potentially massive.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I remember when these rules first came out, there were some advisors kind of throwing up their hands and saying, right, we're just going to pre-notify everything because that covers us, we know. And I don't know if they're actually doing that, but yeah, you're right. There's the risks of doing it are small, the risks of not doing it are big.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, that was a kind of very short little sneak peek at part of our training platform. I will now come back to our main slides. If I can find them. Oh yeah, and just to say that kind of small piece of training content and the assessment that we just completed, that's actually part of our free course on, it's like an overview, an essential guide to the merge scheme. You can actually access that for free via the website. So just go to our website, look for the free course. You know, it takes 2 minutes to register for it. And it's absolutely free. It just gives you a bit of a sample and taste for what we do. And I think, Mike, that brings me neatly to the Q&A. So
well, just before we go to any questions, if Susan's got any questions coming through, I just want to launch a quick poll here for everybody. This is actually just overcome some issues around marketing and data sets for us if we do it this way. If anyone on the call, having listened to Richard and seen what the R&D community is all about, would want to either chat directly with Richard or even jump straight to a trial, you can just indicate on the poll there that that's the case. It just allows us to share data directly back to Richard easily.
Actually, yeah, sorry, Mike, before you submit your answers to that, I should probably just kind of explain that we are, in conjunction with WhisperClaims, offering a free 30-day trial for people that sign up by the end of this month. So if you are interested in taking that free trial, select the second option, and then Mike and Suze, I believe you guys will be pushing out the kind of coupon code to anyone that kind of signs up for that.
Yeah, we'll do that to anyone who's raised their hand there for you. So yeah, no problem. So we'll leave that. We'll just leave that poll kind of running in the background while we go to Q&A. Over to you, Suze.
Thanks, guys. That's brilliant. Thanks, Richard. That was fantastic. So first question, can you clarify whether the claim notification amendment rule not included within HMRC's guidance is solely for the new RDEC merge scheme, or whether it applies to the current SME RDEC scheme?
So it'll apply more broadly. So this is for any accounting period starting from that date, 1st of April 23, irrespective of what scheme it is. So it's not just something that's unique to the two new schemes. This is something that's a broader requirement. Good question. Thank you.
Next question. As a future idea, is there any scope for a resource pack to be able to deliver a training session in a classroom scenario rather than remote learning?
I mean, not for me specifically. I definitely like the online way of doing things because it's so efficient in terms of who we can reach. Like, our members are right across the country. So all of our content, all of our events, they all tend to be online just because it's such a kind of an effective way of doing things. But if you feel there's kind of elements to kind of classroom learning that you really like, then I'd be really interested to speak to you about what those are, so we could maybe try and replicate some of the characteristics of that. So yeah, I'd be interested in a kind of follow-up conversation with whoever made that comment.
It was interesting just seeing who asked that question, actually, Rich. So it was Mitch who asked that question. I have a feeling I understand why he might be asking it. You have done some work recently, haven't you, where you've been helping advisors to educate their clients. So you've been doing some work kind of directly with claimants to bring them up to speed on some of these changes. I think that might be the kind of underlying reason Mitch has asked that question about, you know, how can people access resources to do that, I suppose, is the question.
In terms of client education?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's something it's almost like a bespoke training session that we do on request for the clients of our members. So sometimes, for example, we'll be approached by an accountant who's a member, and they'll say, look, we've got a software company, we're just not quite sure what side of the fence they fall in. Could you just have a chat with them? And typically what we'll do is we'll run a workshop where we're explaining the eligibility criteria and how those apply to software, and then we give them some templates and help them kind of work through and apply those templates to their own projects. And usually we're then able to go back to the accountant and say, on the basis of what your client, the evidence they've been able to provide, we're comfortable that this would constitute a fairly solid claim, or no, this is a complete non-starter, they can't evidence this at all. So yes, I suppose in that respect, we're able to kind of do bespoke training courses. We call that kind of client education workshops. Yeah. And there's another kind of idea that's been kind of bounced around our community as well. This whole idea and notion of sometimes your job as the advisor is quite difficult because your client really doesn't know anything about the schemes. They're kind of hitting this completely cold. So you've then got to do a lot of explanatory work to kind of bring them up to speed. And we're kind of currently considering, like, do we build a course for your clients, your SMEs, to kind of bring them up just a basic level of knowledge to make them easier to work with? The idea being that takes a lot of the kind of repetitious work explaining this out of it from you, so that you've then, I suppose it's more efficient use of time, isn't it? Because you can give your client access to this course. So that's something that's kind of we're considering. We've got quite a lot going on at the moment in terms of building new courses for the certification program that's going to come in September. I don't know if this is kind of outside the scope of this, but we're quite keen to kind of package this training together to give people a really kind of structured way of going through the training and then go through some exams and get a certificate at the end of it. So this will be the industry's first qualification in R&D tax relief, and we're trying to get HMRC involved in this certification program so that they can validate it, just to check it's fit for purpose from their side. But yeah, anyone that's dealt with HMRC will know that they're not particularly good at providing quick feedback, so we're still working on this.
I was going to ask you earlier, actually, just you know, there are lots of accounting training providers out there. You know, there's people working with accountants on a daily basis delivering training. Yet R&D's never been properly covered. And I just wonder why that is. Have you ever worked out why nobody else has done this previously? Has it always just been seen as either too niche or too difficult?
Too niche, too difficult, too subjective. People don't want to share necessarily their experience because that's their secret sauce. Sometimes, so that can be that fear of giving too much away, because if you give it all away, then what have you got to offer? But I actually think, as I was just kind of discussing with the kind of client education piece, like a big part of what we want to do is raise standards, and we can only raise, I think standards can only go up if everyone is on the same level playing field and has the same understanding about what the rules say and what the rules mean and how to get clients on board with this. So it's, for us, it's all about kind of creating consistency and trying to give advisors who might be running big teams an easier way of kind of checking what's going on within those teams. Because say you're running, staff in all parts of the country, or you've got different kind of regional offices and so on, it's really, really difficult to know people's level of experience across that corporate estate, especially when you've got kind of new people coming in, you've got people going, there's always churn. So just kind of getting a measurement on what's the level of knowledge within our team and our organization right now, today, that's really difficult unless you've got a kind of systematic way of doing it. And I think that's kind of what a training system does, is it gives you that oversight and that insight into what's going on within your company. So you can then kind of focus in on where things are going wrong and people are maybe not quite getting the subcontracting rules, for example, or they're giving bad advice about grants. You can kind of identify that and step in and correct it. And that's a nice way of kind of controlling your liabilities as well.
Yeah, it's very similar to what we see from a software perspective. It's even talked about on the call this morning, where making sure that a firm has got consistent processes, whether that's across sites or just amongst even a small team. So one of the analysts this morning's got a team of 3 of them working on claims. They've come in over time from different firms with different practices. They've brought their own spreadsheets, their own templates, etc. And actually, what that means is that the offering had become a little bit disparate and out of control. So having these mechanisms in place, whether that's training or process, but preferably both, it is all about bringing some control and consistency over all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got training process, and then you've got a claim prep process supported by software, and that all kind of forms a kind of really nice package. It's all about consistency. Because I mean, particularly as we've been talking about with HMRC, kind of continually ramping up the pressure and scrutiny on claims, this is now all about compliance and showing your clients in the market and your competitors that you're doing this really well to the best of your ability, and you're really kind of grasping that nettle, and that you're here to stay. You're not giving up like some advisors and heading for the hills, but you're kind of digging in and kind of making sure that you're doing this really well. And the advisors that do that are the ones that are going to weather the storm, because HMRC will eventually move on and they'll start a new initiative once they feel that they've kind of got on top of this one. And then that means obviously that the advisors that have stuck in, they've dug in, they've kind of reconfigured maybe how they're organized and how they train, how they use systems and technology within their organizations, they'll be in such a great place to grow strongly after this kind of HMRC rain cloud moves on to some other aspect.
It's interesting in line with that point. You mentioned a minute ago people being secretive, having their own secret sauce about how they used to deliver this service. And actually, we used to find that people didn't necessarily want to tell their clients that they were using software, or they were, leaning on us for support, leaning on a third party for support. And actually, that's quite the opposite now. They want to declare it. They want to show that they're using a process that's coming in from experts on the outside. And equally, they'll want to show through the certification process that you put in place that they've gone through training. It's a really interesting shift in quite a short space of time.
Yeah, as we were talking about, it's all about that swing from the old model of we can help get you the most money possible with the lowest possible fees. It's now all about quality, compliance, and we know what we're doing, and we can actually evidence that. And I think that's been the missing piece, is over the last X number of years, advisors have all ended up kind of saying the same things in terms of we're all experts, we're all really good at this, but there's actually not been an easy way to evidence and prove that up until fairly recently. So certainly the fact that you're taking training, our members directory is actually linked through to people's training records or the company's training records. So you can actually look at that members directory and see who's ranked more highly than other organizations. And then once we bring out the certification as well, that will be on the website too. So we're all about trying to raise the profile of people that are investing in themselves and in their service, because we feel it's only fair that the companies that are making that investment profit from it. So you should get more clients because you're able to actually evidence the fact that you're performing at a higher level than most of your competitors.
Yeah.
So that's the idea.
Yeah, brilliant. Sorry, Susan, stops you asking.
There are some more questions coming in. So I've got one here that says that you mentioned earlier on in the talk that you have a helpline. What do you get as a member of the community, and how do you price? Is it per seat, per user?
Cool. Thank you for the question. So we've kind of got 3 membership tiers at the moment. Starting at the bottom, we've got the kind of practitioner level, which is effectively single user. So that is £200 a month, and that gives you access to 3 helpline requests. That gives you access to everything that we've got in the community. So all the webinars, all of the training courses, all of the WhatsApp groups, etc. The ability to add to our consultation responses and so on. The next level up is for teams. So that starts at £250 per month, and that gives you access for 3 people. And the nice thing about that membership team is it's expandable. So say you've got 4 people in your team rather than 3, you can add that 4th person for an additional £50 per month. And each kind of successive person that you add is £50. So the more people you add, the cheaper it becomes per head overall. And then once you get up to 25 users, then you're in the enterprise realm. And that's when we'd kind of spend a bit of time with you to work out your unique requirements and design something that's really quite kind of tailored and specific to what you want and your team. So yeah, to recap, that single user is £200 a month, 3 users is £250, and you can expand that with £50 a month per head. And an enterprise is kind of a bespoke deal. But for the purposes of this free trial, if you do sign up with that, you can add as many people as you like. So that's a really kind of nice way of getting lots of people's kind of perspective on our training content and our service, so that you can make a really informed decision at the end of that trial period about whether to continue. And also, just to finish up on that, we don't use lock-in, so you're kind of free to, you're not signing up for a 6 or 12-month thing. It just rolls month to month. All we ask is a 30-day notice period. So it's quite kind of convenient to pick up.
Thanks, Richard. I've got quite a situational question here from an individual perspective. I imagine everybody on the call, most will have some will relate to this in some way. So the query is, have you heard anything in regards to HMRC sorting out their communication with claims? The email that's been provided has never had a response. When this individual rings the helpline, they're told to email. HMRC seem to be avoiding communicating at all with agents and clients. It's hard to imagine clients, it's hard to manage clients' expectations around likely repayment timeframes when HMRC do not respond.
And unfortunately, that is a very, very common experience at the moment. HMRC under-resourced, under huge pressure. There have been so many kind of people disagreeing with HMRC's opinions about claims that it's really spiked the number of SOLS reviews. So if you disagree, you can request an independent review from the SOLS department, which is essentially HMRC's legal department. But even they are backed up, I believe, for about 6 months. So the whole system is really kind of creaking at the moment. And that's another reason why I think things have got to change, because what they have been doing up until now isn't working, because it's not fair. The systems are breaking down. They don't have the resources. And we've made some positive suggestions as part of our consultation process about how they can kind of improve this whole situation. But to do that, they're going to have to change the mindset and start to work with organizations out there in industry, I think, to kind of effect positive change.
Yeah, some of them, we certainly had these types of queries in our WhatsApp group as well. And I think the key message is to keep going, really. You just have to keep trying, keep communicating, and do what you can. So
yep.
That's it for the questions, but actually that's led us up really, really neatly to just finishing just on time. Richard, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for giving us your time this afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'll leave it for you both for any final thoughts.
Yeah, just from me, just to remind everybody, we put the slide up earlier on about the remaining sessions in the summit. So we've got a session tomorrow morning with Joe on marketing, and tomorrow afternoon with Susan and I just working through a demo of WhisperClaims. So if you're interested in either of those things, do make sure you use that link in the chat box to sign up and come and join us. And the last thing from me is just to say thank you very much for joining us, and thanks to Richard as well. And any final thoughts from you, Rich?
no, just again, echoing, thank you very much for attending. It was great to have that opportunity, and I really enjoyed it. So thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Bye.